Welcome, everybody. We are going to wait a minute or two, and then we will get started. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Creativity, History, and Zines, a conversation with archivists. I'm Tanya Zanish-Belcher, Director of Special Collections and Archives for Wake Forest University, and I will be serving as your moderator today. We are currently in a Zoom webinar, so the panelists are not necessarily able to see or hear the attendees who are also muted. Please be sure and sign up for closed captioning when the prompt appears if you need to do so. We will have some time scheduled at the end for you to submit questions and comments via the Zoom Q&A for the panelists to respond. I will also be sharing out some links during the presentation through chat. We are recording this session, and once reviewed, we will make it available on the ZSR Library YouTube channel. I'd like to say a special thank you to Rebecca Peterson-May, our Public Services Archivist, and Wake Forest IT for handling our technical support today. Finally, for any faculty or students joining us today from Wake Forest and beyond, I would highly encourage you to work with your archives on collecting zines from individuals or from classes. They offer us a tremendous opportunity to capture voices who are often left out of any official documentation or the institutional record. So now to our panel. Our panelists of zine experts today are Kelly Wooten. Kelly is the Research Services and Collection Development Librarian for the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History at Duke University. She is also the author of Zines as Primary Sources, which I will share in the chat. Kelly will talk about the history of zines and collection development issues for the collection at Duke. Lauren Brewer. Lauren is the head reference librarian at High Point University and is an active zine creator. Lauren will be doing a live demo of creating a zine, so please have your scissors and paper handy. She will also be discussing issues relating to the preservation and access of zines. And Libby Coiner. Libby is a zine librarian and the archivist and assistant librarian for Elon University. Libby will discuss collaborative partnerships and also share why zines can be so important for archives and can enable us to expand our collections beyond traditional documentation. I will share a couple of starting questions for each panelist, and they will respond to those, and it is very possible they may engage with each other in conversation or observations. So we're going to start with Kelly, who will share her screen. Kelly, can you briefly describe the history of zines? When did people start making them and why? And can you tell us about the collection at Duke? What is your collecting policy and what challenges do you face in caring for and collecting zines?
Great, thank you for that great introduction. And thank you to everyone for being here. I'm really excited to be with you, especially my panelists and community, to talk about zines this afternoon. Even if we can't see your bright shining faces, we are happy that you're here together with us. So I am going to, as Tanya mentioned, share a little bit about the history of zines and about the collection at the Sally Bingham Center at Duke University. Sometimes I advance the slides correctly. There we go. So I like to start with a brief history of zines and would love for you to share your guesses about how old is the earliest zine? When did zines start? And I think you can't chat with everyone, but I think you can put a message to the hosts into the chat if you want to just type in a guess for your date or decade or period you think zine started, or maybe you could post it into the Q&A. See. All right, cool. I have some folks coming into the chat. So yeah, all right, great. 2004, 1920s, 1980s, 1930s, 40 years. I think there might be a ringer in the crowd. I won't read that answer. 70 years, 1950s, a couple of folks guessing. And you're anonymous here, so you can make a wild guess and no one will know but me. Oh, question, how old are Xerox machines? That was a great question. 60s. Bronte sisters made zines, wonderful. Cool, I love these answers. There's such a good variety. 1740s, awesome. I think that's the earliest guess. Cool. Oh, I'm spoiling my whole talk by scrolling with my mouse. All right, so this is still up for debate, but generally zine folks look at this publication called The Comet as the first science fiction fanzine. So fanzine is short for fan magazine, which is then shortened to fanzine, which is then shortened to zine. From the 1930s, you can see this beautiful illustrated cover. It's from a 1940 issue. I personally feel like zines really fit into this long tradition of self-publishing. So as soon as the printing press was available to folks, people were writing political and religious tracts to distribute. That tradition has continued as printing technology, like the Xerox machine, as someone mentioned, has developed. So as long as people have been able to write and publish, they've been writing materials that could be considered like zines, but we usually just go with the 1930s science fiction fanzines as part of the origin story. And just jumping forward in the 60s and 70s, we see a lot of counterculture and underground press that is being published, particularly in the US in association with the movement for civil rights. Publications were, of course, a really important part of the women's liberation movement. And then later in the 70s and 80s, punk music was emerging as a particular subculture. And going back to the print technology, people were more easily able to create and distribute their own publications in an affordable way. So the collection at the Sally Bingham Center is really grounded in, or kind of the core is with the 1990s Riot Girl movement. And this is a little snapshot of a few highlights from the timeline from the 1980s through the 90s, kind of pointing out some of the big things that happened during those decades. So a lot of the groundwork for modern zine culture and for Riot Girl was laid during the 1980s. In Washington, DC, there was a punk scene that was becoming politicized, and women who participated in those music scenes and other spaces were calling out and critiquing the sexism of that community. And 1990s Riot Girl co-evolved with third wave feminism, so sparked in part by the testimony of Anita Hill against Clarence Thomas in 1992. Rebecca Walker, who you may know as Alice Walker's daughter, wrote an article for Ms. Magazine called Becoming the Third Wave, where she articulated this moment where people were recognizing what was happening in the Supreme Court hearings around Clarence Thomas. And I find that her article really resonates with me, and I always read from it when I get the chance. So she wrote, "To me, the hearings were not about determining whether or not Clarence Thomas did in fact harass Anita Hill. They were about checking and redefining the extent of women's credibility and power." She goes on to write, "Let Thomas's confirmation serve to remind you, as it did me, that the fight is far from over. Let this dismissal of a woman's experience move you to anger. Turn that outrage into political power. Do not vote for them unless they work for us. Do not break bread with them. Do not nurture them if they don't prioritize our freedom to control our bodies and our lives. I am not a post-feminism feminist. I am the third wave." So I feel like those quotes really capture that moment in a way that brings together the political awakening in the early 1990s in combination with some of these pop culture moments. 1992 is when an influential article was published in Newsweek that sort of took this underground movement and highlighted it so that people across the country became aware of it. The zines were being reviewed and mentioned in mainstream women's magazines like 17 and Sassy, and the core of Riot Grrrl is kind of happening, and then almost as quickly is ending. And I always like to also to highlight that kind of towards the end of the 90s, we have the internet happening, which had a big impact on print culture, but didn't quite extinguish zines the way some folks imagine. So what is Riot Grrrl? It included music, zines, art, spoken word, direct action activism, and called on a DIY or do-it-yourself ethic and an ethic of anti-expertise. That I always laugh when folks refer to us as zine experts because it's a little bit antithetical. Like we have a lot of experience with them, but sometimes we like to reject that authority in a way. So the Riot Grrrl is happening in like 91 to 96, and the bands and activists who coined that term were geographically located in the Pacific Northwest, Olympia, Washington, around there, Portland, Seattle, and then later in Washington, DC. And when those articles that I mentioned hit the mainstream and in the Newsweek and other magazines, people who were kind of in the core of Riot Grrrl rejected that media coverage that portrayed them in ways that they found to be misrepresentative, which is still a problem today with activist movements. The women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s struggled with it. The Black Lives Matter movement struggles with it today. There's always sort of like a the media focuses on one or two aspects of the people who are engaged in the movement that are not necessarily reflective of their beliefs and activism. So this image is of a flyer that was inspired by text from the Riot Grrrl manifesto that was published originally in Kathleen Hanna's zine Bikini Kill in 1991. It says, I'm just gonna skip to the end that you can't see on this flyer. It says, because every time we pick up a pen or an instrument or get anything done, we are creating the revolution. We are the revolution. And even though Riot Grrrl is a relatively short and small movement, this map from a project called Alien Chi represents the distribution of Riot Grrrl chapters in the US. It extends beyond that, but you can see that it wasn't just in these little spots on the coast. It really went, I guess we would say viral now, but it really caught the imagination of folks who were all over the US, kind of in their own bedrooms and doing their own things. They could identify with this feminist movement on their own and claim that title and create a Riot Grrrl chapter, even if it was just themselves or their siblings or a small group of friends. So I'm gonna start to wrap up my part and talk a little bit about like who was writing zines and then move into what the Bingham Center is collecting. So you will probably not be surprised to hear that zines, and particularly the zines of the 1990s that are in our collection at the Bingham Center are written by middle-class white women in their teens and early 20s, and that they have the time and freedom to put together zines and the kind of privilege of making their viewpoint, feeling that their own viewpoint was valuable. And it's been written that zine making does require some social privileges and leisure time. You need time, confidence, and resources. And but I would also argue that zine technology is very accessible, as you're going to find out. Well, Lauren shows you how to fold a mini that just, paper and scissors and a pen. And you don't have to have a lot of time and energy. You don't have to have the fanciest design software or artistic skill. That it's one of the few things that can still be relatively anonymous and easy to conceal in your backpack, and really creates a potential for person-to-person intimacy. And I argue that zines continue to hold a particular space for trans and queer folks, which Libby's going to talk about a little bit later, I hope. So, our collection is predominantly white, just like many archives are predominantly white, but that doesn't mean that there weren't women of color, people of color involved in the movement, writing, making music, participating in this culture. So the zines that I have pictured here, Shotgun Seamstress and Evolution of a Race Riot, are two kind of highlights that I really like to use as examples. I'll start with Evolution of a Race Riot. Mimi Tai Nguyen, who edited this piece, put out her call for submissions in 1995 as a direct reaction to anthologies written by, for, and about white women. And she writes in the intro to this piece that the compilation was written exclusively by people of color around punk and girl, G with 3 R's, in order to begin dialogues with each other, or rather by, for, and about, and in community with people of color, not primarily intended for a white audience, but and not intended to educate white people. It's more to be in conversation with among the community. The majority of the contributors to this volume are Asian American or biracial, although it's broader than that. And Jen, who's a gender studies professor now, wrote, the race riot has lagged years behind the girl one for reasons that should be obvious by now. White boy mentality became a legitimate target, but white girls' racial privilege and discourse went unmarked, except among those of us who were never white. I feel like her assessment really resonates with today's racial reckoning with white privilege and white supremacy, and the critiques of that. I also really love Shotgun Seamstress, which was published in the 2000s. It demonstrates this kind of long tail of Riot Girl and zine creation. It was written by or edited by Osa Eto, who's a Nigerian American who also wrote for the mainstream music scene Maximum Rock and Roll. And I love her introduction to Shotgun Seamstress. She writes, this zine is by and for Black punks, queers, misfits, feminists, artists, musicians, weirdos, and the people who support us. This zine is meant to support Black people who exist within predominantly white subcultures and to encourage the creation of our own. And I won't go into detail on this here, but this particular issue has a letter by Brontez Purnell, who's a Black gay man who is a poet and published writer now. He wrote the zine Fag School, and he recalls writing a letter to Kathleen Hanna of Bikini Kill when he was in high school, and was absolutely thrilled when she responded with some words of inspiration. So even though Riot Girl wasn't created by or for young Black gay men growing up in Alabama, Brontez found a point of connection there through the music and the zine that he discovered through 17 magazine. So the collection at the Sally Bingham Center started in the early 2000s, in 2001, when Sarah Dyer, and I'm going to make you all seasick by scrolling back to the first slide. In the middle is the Action Girl Guide. You can see this drawing of a girl sitting on a pile of zines. Sarah Dyer was one of those folks who was noticing that the spaces she were in were dominated by men, and created her own space for women and girls' voices to write zines. And the original archivist of the Sally Bingham Center, Jenny Daly, was interested in zines, was trying to collect them in the 90s kind of as they were happening, but wasn't able to make that work for a number of reasons. But she was in touch with Sarah Dyer, who remembered this connection and placed her collection with us when Christina Fabretto, who might be in the audience today, and Amy Lee were leading the Sally Bingham Center at the time. And so since that first collection was placed with us, we have grown to over 6,000 zines and counting. Our collection is primarily by women and girls, but is gender inclusive and expansive. We focus on collecting zines by people of color, queer and trans folks, and zines that align with other areas of interest like the American South. We love travel zines because they correlate with the women's travel diaries of the 19th century that we collect. Zines on reproductive health and sexuality, domestic culture, feminism, activism, labor. They really align really nicely with our broader women's history collections in a way that kind of brings those women's voices forward into the modern culture. And one thing that is, Christine is here, great. And with our collections, we do a lot of instruction and workshops like this and outreach. And some of the fun things that we've done are participating in the Durham Zine Machine Fest, which Lauren has participated in and Libby has attended. And it's really wonderful that we've been able to take this kind of archival collection and bring it out and about into the community through online presentations like this and in-person presentations. And I found this wonderful quote from maybe Tanya in the Evolution of a Race Riot that I wanted to close with before I pass it off to Lauren, because it kind of resonated with the spaces that we try to facilitate. So she wrote about the zine Evolution of a Race Riot. She writes, "At worst, this will be the one and only, for now, portable punk rock community of color companion reader. At best, maybe it'll really be a race riot. And we can start here by throwing our Molotovs and poisoning the well, by making plans to rendezvous with others of our kind in dingy clubs, well-lit bookstores, and comfy living rooms." So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, Lauren, I think you are up. And you're going to demonstrate actually creating a zine. And while you do that, or before you do that, would you like to talk about what you enjoy about the process? And then would you also describe the preservation and access issues archivists can face when zines, which are often ephemeral, one-of-a-kind items, are part of your collections?
Sure, thank you. So like Tanya said, I'm Lauren Brewer. And I'm the head of reference services at High Point University in High Point, North Carolina. And I think similar to many librarians and archivists that are involved in zines, whether that's zine librarianship or making zines, I had some interest in zines as a teenager, but my kind of full-fledged introduction was actually as an intern with Kelly at the Bingham Center. And then outside of my work in libraries, I also, I guess, used to table at Zine Fest before the pandemic. And I was one of the organizers of the Greensboro Zine Fest in Greensboro, North Carolina. And at the previous institution I worked at, I taught a zine-focused freshman seminar class 3 years in a row. And especially through that class, I realized that teaching folks how to make zines is one of the best things ever. It can be exciting and empowering for people to be able to tell their story or to create a zine that, they get to talk about something they're passionate about really as much as they want. And so, like Tanya said, I'm gonna demonstrate how to make a 8-page mini zine out of one sheet of blank letter paper. And these zines are a really great intro to zine making, especially if one's audience really doesn't have any context or experience with zines. I've done these mini zine making workshops with folks at Zine Fest, during classes, as a part of my job, and informally with my friends. And one of the reasons I love this process is because it has such a low barrier to entry. All you really need is a piece of paper. It doesn't even have to be blank paper. You could do it with some lined paper if that's all you have, and some sort of writing implement if you want to, insert content into your zine. Scissors do help, but they are not required. So it's a little awkward. I've never done this virtually, so I'm going to try to do it in a way that everyone can follow along. So I'm taking this sheet of paper, and I'm going to fold it in half, hot dog style, which is along the short edge of the paper. So I guess you can remember hot dog style because it's like long, like a hot dog. I like, people use that that language a lot in zine workshops, and so I had to like remember, okay, what's hot dog versus hamburger? But every time I do a fold, I'm going to do my very best to match up the edges, and I'm also going to crease very well. Some folks will use a bone folder, but if you don't have one, then you can just make sure it's creased really well. And I think it's important to say that when I'm doing this folding, I'm trying to keep the folded part at the top and the open part at the bottom. Okay, so now if you have your hot dog style folded sheet of paper, we're gonna do it hamburger style, so along the long edge this time. I have to put it down to actually crease the paper. So now we have that the first sheet of paper, we folded it this way, and then we folded it hamburger style along the middle. And now we're going to do one more hamburger style fold. And this will make it look, similar to a mini zine. And this is the thickest fold, so it can kind of be the hardest to make sure that you get a really nice crease. So now you should have something, like I said, that looks, similar to the shape and the size of a mini zine, but when you actually open it up, it's confusing. Where would the cover be? What's page 1? So unfold the whole thing, and now you can see that we have our 8 pages here, or I'll sometimes say 6 pages with a front and back cover. And now that you've gotten it all unfolded, we're going to fold it again, but instead of doing the hot dog style fold that we started with, we're going to fold it hamburger style. And if nothing is printed on your paper, then it doesn't really matter, you know, kind of which way that you fold it at this step. So it is folded. I took my folded paper and I folded it hamburger style along the long edge in half. And now this part is crucial. So you're gonna take either your scissors, or since it's already creased, you can fold it. You can kind of, you know, use your desk, or as Kelly is beautifully demonstrating, you can just rip it. And what you want to do is cut or tear from the fold, not the open spot, the side at the bottom, from the fold. And you want to cut down along the line to the middle. So now, when you're holding your paper, you should have, you know, one side, the open side is just normal. And then the creased edge has this cut or tear. And this is a zine design tip, but if you tear or, you know, rip this slit, then it gives it kind of like a punk flare. So we're doing a professional zine with the cutting. Now I'm going to open everything back up again, and you should have this kind of peekaboo slit right in the very middle of your paper. And this part, I can't even really explain this in person. So you want to fold it in half, hot dog style once again, where you have this kind of flappy thing. And I always hold it with the fold at the top, where you cut or tore as well at the top, open at the bottom, and I just kind of pinch these two sides together and hold them and push it together. And then you'll end up with this quarter paper where you can then fold it once more in half once more to get your mini zine. And folding it in this way produces a lovely 8-page booklet. I want to demonstrate that one more time, where you have your paper with the cut in the middle, and then you fold it in half. And I wish I had a better way to describe this than just squish it together. Kind of make sure that these pieces, like these, I guess the crease line where this starts, comes together, if that makes sense. I've also sent a link to our moderator that was disseminated as well with the invite. That's how to make this very zine with, oh my gosh, I'm completely blanking on her name, even though I was like, oh, I remember. How to Make This Very Zine by Anne Elizabeth Moore. And it's a really awesome printable that tells you how to go through this process, and it's available in a few different languages, which can be super useful. And at this point, if I was doing a zine class, I would usually tell my students to write lightly and using a pencil on each page. But I'll do it on with a marker just for visibility's sake. But I'm labeling each of the page. This says cover, and I'm doing like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then back cover. This is helpful because it can be a lot easier once you unfold it. You'll see kind of the layout of everything, and then you can put it down flat if you wanted to add content to it. Of course, you could fold it and then add content while it's folded as well. And as far as content goes, it can really be anything you like. This could look like, just using a black pen and writing in your folded zine. You can, cut out images from old magazines for collaging, draw a comic, cover the zine in stickers that you like, whatever you can think of. A big part of zine culture is the reproducibility and the distribution of zines. That's why, we have zine fests, and there's a big kind of overlap with like male culture and male art and zines, because typically they are copied and distributed in some way. So I think that's really important to keep in mind when you're working on your zine. Do you have access to a color printer, or do you want to make it something that folks can print out and download and print out on their own? That's kind of just, some things to think about as you're adding content to your zine. Typically, I'll just do, black and white copies of mine. But of course, you don't have to make copies if you don't want to. And of course, this demo is in no way meant to be prescriptive. I think that's one of the wonderful things about zine making, right, is that there are tons of different ways that you can even make a zine like this, or a larger zine. One of my favorites is to make as a half-size zine, where I just take a bunch of paper and fold it in half. And this is big enough where you can add really as much content as you want. And there's also usually, at least in the layout, no cutting or tearing involved. And I think that, the easy to distribute, the easy to create aspects of zines are why they are both, somewhat accessible to be added to library collections, and also somewhat difficult because there are issues of preservation and access. I wish I had, amazing tips about how to add a zine collection to your library or your special collections. But it's really, it depends on kind of what you imagine the needs of the people that are going to be using the collection. I love the idea of having, a circulating zine collection, and then if something, gets ruined or is lost, a part of me, feels like that's what zines are about. They're they're ephemeral and they're meant to kind of, you know, end up wherever. And that's kind of a fun part of zine culture. But then, of course, you know, we also have to think about preserving items and how can we manage preservation with access as well. So basically, I have no answer to that question that Tanya asked, but
that's quite
yeah,
all right.
other than to say that it's so hard, and it really is just a case by case basis and consideration of, you know, what do you want to do with these zines and what's the purpose of them really.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We're going to finish up with Libby. And Libby, what does creating zines mean for historically marginalized groups? How are they used and what do they mean? And can you share some special zines partnerships that you have worked on? And how can archivists, students, and others collaborate on the creation of zines?
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm going to see if I can share my screen right now. And I think I've tried to answer this question. Can y'all see that? Yay, okay, cool. All right, so because zines are all about storytelling, I'm going to tell a few stories, but I'll try to keep it fairly short.
Libby, I think we're still seeing like your Zoom screen over your presentation. There we go.
Oh dear. Okay, let's see. Thank you, Kelly. Oh dear.
That's good.
Did I get?
Perfect.
Okay, cool. All right. Hi, my name is Libby. I am a Leo rising, Libra moon. I use she or they pronouns. I do memory work, critical archives, and zine work at Belk Library at Elon University, where I've worked for over 4 years. And I'm super excited to be here with two of my zine crushes, Lauren Brewer and Kelly Wooten, as well as one of my mentors, Tanya Zanish-Belcher. I met Tanya and Kelly 5 summers ago in Berea, Kentucky, one really memorable week when I was going through treatment for cancer. And we all hung out with bell hooks. So it's always nice to spend time in community with y'all. And I think I saw Vin on the call as well. Hi, Vin at Library of Congress, ALI 2016, best cohort ever. So I'm going to give a little brief genealogy, including some embarrassing photos. Let's see. Oops, I think I may have shared the wrong screen. Let's see. Can y'all see that okay? Oh, it took my photos off. There it is. Okay. So for some context, I'm a child of the Pacific Northwest in the 1980s and 1990s. And after fleeing rural Idaho at age 19 for Portland, Oregon, I got my punk education from what I believe are the younger, queerer siblings of the Riot girls. Portland during that time in the 2000s was such a space for queer creativity and DIY culture. It included everything from folks reclaiming publishing through zines, playing punk shows in their basements, writing rock operas, or hosting secret vegan cafes in the backyard. And I learned about everything from queer and trans history to punk music from zines. Portland actively cultivated collective spaces such as the Independent Publishing Resources Center, where folks could print their own stuff and learn how to publish their own materials. There was a zine shop called Reading Frenzy. And most of the bookstores, including Powell's City of Books, had a full zine section and small press section. So I feel like zines were everywhere. it was kind of those years before smartphones, before the internet is what it is today, and zines still circulated, but they still circulate now. At the same time that I was, I'll go back one. At the same time that I was getting a queer punk education in the basements of Northeast Portland, I finished a bachelor's degree in history at Portland State University. And I went on to study archives at University of British Columbia. And a lot of the reason I did that is because I didn't see my community, my queer community, reflected in archives. And I had a lot of feelings about that, and I wanted to change that. So another student at Portland State University decided to start a rock and roll camp for girls as her senior capstone. And so some of my first archival processing was actually arranging and describing the materials, which were primarily zines of the rock and roll camp for girls in the old sewing factory in Northeast Portland. And my friend Winter Bell was the director of the rock camp at the time and paid me in drum lessons. So it felt really appropriately punk. And I love that the girls rock camp idea spread all over the country and the world. And Kelly has worked with the one that was organized in Durham, Girls Rock NC. And I believe that Kelly also takes care of a number of zines from that rock camp at the Sally Bingham as well. One really important thing I think to acknowledge is that as a queer person, my politics developed out of making community with queer and trans folks in the early 2000s in the wake of AIDS and HIV, which were hardly over, but had been so devastating in the 1990s. So the generation just before mine had suffered such great loss that we had lost a lot of queer elders who weren't able to pass some of the history on to us. But also there were so many activists who were doing work around AIDS and HIV prevention, treatment, and care, and who were distributing zines about it. And now kind of stepping into a role as a queer elder, it feels important to pass this history along to the next generations who will take up this work after we're done, to hopefully work toward a gentler and queerer and more gender expansive future. Because after all, archives aren't just about thinking about the past, they're also about writing a different future that we can work toward. When I came to Elon over 4 years ago, I didn't necessarily see collections that reflected my queer punk self, nor did I see collections that represented many of the queer and trans and non-binary students who I support. So I asked my amazing boss, Crystal Carpenter, and our dean, Joan Ruel, if I could start a zine collection, and they said yes. So I just want to acknowledge that I am really, really grateful for the mentors like Kelly Wooten and Jenna Friedman, pictured here, who have done this work for so long and who have done things like created the Zine Librarian's Code of Ethics, which you can see here. It's also online. Which helps us think about how to use zine collecting to pay artists for their work and to make sure that we have their consent before putting things in our collections. We also don't digitize zines to put online, but are so grateful to the work of Milo Miller at the Queer Zine Archive Project, who has put so much queer history in the form of zines and ephemera online. I've used it to teach with routinely and found so much ACT UP and AIDS and HIV activism work on there from this period that affirmed that queer folks have always known how to tell our stories, especially through queer punk self-publishing. So this also gives me a chance to plug this event on November 3rd for anyone who would like to continue to be in community with us around zines. Kelly will be part of it once again. And Kelly has graciously introduced me to Milo Miller, who's the co-creator of the Queer Zine Archive Project. So I'm really excited to learn from Milo. Meanwhile, last year, and I feel like this is a testament to the magic of zines, a dear student of mine somehow discovered a 1990s era zine by Micah Bazant called Tim Tum, which talks about the intersections of transgender and Jewish identities. So I asked Micah to present, and they said yes. And Milo said, oh, actually that zine really impacted me too. And Tim Tum is also available on the Queer Zine Archive project. So I feel like that just goes to show the magic of zines. And I just wanted to say that I've been organizing some teach-ins with my dear collaborator, Lauren Gilmet, in the philosophy department. And we've been having fun this term in terms of, she's teaching a senior SEM class on philosophy of archives, and we're really embedding zines and thinking about archives as a communal practice in general into the class. And it's been really amazing. And we've also embedded a lot of zine work into Lauren's WGSS classes because the topics of zines often fit so well with WGSS material. We also both serve on our WGSS board. So it's just been a really great way to kind of collaborate across the university. That's a picture of Lauren, who's a fan of archives at the Feminist Theory Archives. We're also in community with some really amazing other memory workers. And I just wanted to mention our friend Amanda Bennett, who is a Duke University literature PhD candidate who does really amazing work around envisioning Black queer futures. And she especially uses fragments from archives like the Lesbian Herstory archives to tell stories. And Amanda did this incredible, it was actually a collective project by her class on a Toni Morrison class. And they did a zine to leave as a deposit from their time in that class together. And that one is online as well. And I think that's a really interesting example of, you know, zines originated, Kelly talked about zines originating from print culture, but I think that it goes to show that they're still thriving in an online format. I wanted to say I've worked to create a really radical Southern collection, and I've purchased a lot of the zines at zine festivals in both Durham and Greensboro. It's been so amazing to take students to those festivals so they can meet other creative folks and help me build the collections and get inspiration to make their own zines. We were really taken by the UNC Chapel Hill Zine Club and got a number of really awesome zines from them. And both Kelly and Lauren are often there with zines as well. These are a few zines we got from activists who have done work around removing the Silent Sam statue from the UNC Chapel Hill campus and provide really important accounts that I can share with students as examples as they learn about activist traditions, as well as models for how to reclaim their narrative. Zines have also remained part of our creative toolkit during pandemic as a way of documenting the bizarre world we're experiencing, as a way of staying connected across distance and to write different futures. So one wacky thing that happened is that I got married a month before the pandemic lockdown started. My partner Shepherd and I eloped to a jailhouse in Asheville. And so we wrote a zine to tell people that we got married and to introduce each other to our families and friends. And I also wrote this other zine called Well Shit Bags, an ostomy zine. That one is about having cancer and now living with a permanent ostomy, just to educate people about my illness and what foods I can and can't eat now. And one thing I wanted to mention is my partner grew up in Arizona, where we met, and I learned that when they were in high school, they were also getting these amazing like Navajo and Native zines in the 1990s. So it was awesome to find that we had this shared history. And the day we got married, we went to our favorite anarchist bookstore in Asheville and bought a few of these zines to add to our collection. These are some zines about my cat, because just to emphasize that you can write about a zine about anything. The Major Arcata features my cats if they were in the tarot. And this is one that I wrote during pandemic called Body by Orida. And this is my cat Arlo modeling that. Most recently, I worked with Elon's Maker Hub to provide grab and go zine kits for our students because they're so simple. And so a lot of it is just to show how easy it is to make and teach them the process of making the one-page mini zine. And I have one wonderful student who works in both the zine library and the Maker Hub. So we got a chance to spread zines out all over the Maker Hub and students could work on their own. And we spent time talking about radical zine traditions. So the zine collection, I think, has been really a haven for queer and trans students, not just because they see themselves represented in those collections, but also because they come to work with me in the archives and help me catalog the materials. The collection really reflects them, and they're able to read those materials through a queer lens and apply the appropriate descriptive information in the database. And it gives us a chance to share that history across generations, kind of continuing the magic of zines. I know that zines aren't necessarily for everyone, but like flagging, I find that they're a really great method for queer signaling in a space that doesn't always feel terribly queer affirming. That's why I was excited when my partner and I got this zine on flagging for our personal collection recently. And I just wanted to say, as I found such queer chosen community at Elon, I count so many among my mentors and heroes for doing the queer work on that campus to make it a gentler space for all of us. And I'm especially grateful for the folks who continue to educate me, collaborate with me, send students my way, and think about archives as a communal practice. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Libby. I love that idea of archives as a communal practice. To our audience, if you have questions that you would like the panelists to answer, please submit them in the Q&A, and I think the chat is also open too. We have a question. Are zines always made basically kind of like how you made it, Lauren? I don't think they are. I think there's a lot of flexibility in how zines are created. They're not always just one way, correct? Lauren?
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, definitely. So this, like this one is 8 pages or 6 with a front and a back cover. And because of the kind of, I don't know, the intricacy of folding it in this way, it would have to be that way. But like Kelly said, any multiple of 4, because one can, you know, like I was giving the example of doing a half size zine, which is half of a letter sheet folded in half, and this would create 4 pages, or 2 with a front and a back cover, and then you can add more pages in. So it's really can be as many or as few as you would like.
And as Kelly noted, the evolution of a Race Riot zine is over 90 pages. Other questions? So Abby asked if there are any other zine resources that you all might recommend that have not been mentioned, other than the links, I think, that were posted.
I really recommend just poking around in, you know, just there's a lot of great zine distributors like Brown Recluse and the People of Color Zine Project that have a really broad representation of zines. And I learned about zines by collecting them, which can be expensive, but also you don't, zines themselves aren't that expensive, so you can kind of put together a pretty great little set for under 20 bucks if you're interested in learning more about them. And my favorite zine resource, honestly, and maybe it's selfishly, is the zineLibraries.info that I put into the chat. It's a zine librarian kind of information clearinghouse, which, you know, librarians love to overshare too much information, but there's tons of how-tos and DIYs. And I always learn things from other people who are doing things differently than I would have imagined. So yeah, Zine Libraries is my go-to. And then there are so many places online that have how-tos and access to different zines about different topics.
We have another question that just came in, and they would like to know if the panelists are aware of any other discussions around digitizing zines by projects or institutions. There are local collections that we'd like to preserve while respecting the materials that they hold.
Well, I can just say a little bit, and with a huge nod to Kelly and all the zine librarians who have done the work. One thing is I love Queer Zine Archive Project, and I use it all the time. And I really appreciate all of the labor that Milo puts into putting that together, including getting consent from folks to put their materials online. A lot of times, you know, you can't necessarily go back retroactively and get that consent. And it's really important, especially for the stuff that was created pre-internet, I think, that folks wouldn't know what kind of world was going to be around in a digital age. And so they didn't necessarily intend that to be put out there for everyone to see. And I think also zines are often used to tell kind of vulnerable stories, and they're not necessarily ours to put out to everyone. Kelly, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but like I recently opened Kelly's amazing newsletter that I super love getting every time. But like Kelly's been so generous to be like, this is not for libraries or archives. This is for your personal use. And I'm like, awesome. Every zine should have that note about consent or not consent on it.
And I have to credit Jenna Friedman at Barnard for being the one who's always like, put a date on your zine, put your place of publication on your zine, say whether or not it's okay for people to reuse it. Because some of my other public little mini zines are like, whatever, do whatever you want, just don't sell them. Yeah, I agree with Libby that QZAP is like the gold standard for digitization of zines. The Zine Librarians Code of Ethics, which Libby mentioned, has a section on digitization, and who knows when it will come out, but we meaning other people, not me, working on a new code of ethics focused specifically on digitization and issues like that. And it's very creator centered, which is so wonderful that the zine community is really focused on making sure that the creators get paid for their work, credit for their work, and get intellectual control over their work. So if they don't indicate in the zine what's okay to do with it, then it's important to contact that person and get permission before kind of doing anything, putting things online.
Okay, I think we've run a little bit over, but this has been really enjoyable, and I always love learning about zines, always, always. I hope you all enjoyed this. We appreciate your coming. If you have any ideas for special collections programming, we're always looking for projects and ideas. So I shared our email in the chat, and I would like to especially thank Lauren, Kelly, and Libby for sharing their experiences and their stories today. We really appreciate it. And if you want to answer Stephanie's questions, you may. She wants to know your favorite zines. We'll close up with your favorite zines.
My favorite zine is this one I got at Richmond Zine Fest. It's like all of these folks wrote about what they love about the fast food restaurant Taco Bell, and it's just like beautifully, beautifully done.
Mine's always like the last one I read. So I don't have a good answer.
I have to say my very favorite zine that I still kind of use all the time in teaching, which is funny. But it's my friend Sarah's wedding zine. And my friends Sarah and Dan got married a couple of years ago, and they wanted to teach their friends about different Jewish traditions that they were practicing and why. And it was so beautiful. And it just, she and I helped organize the rock and roll camp for girls in Phoenix together. And so I just love that she chose to invite people into her wedding with a zine, which is so appropriate.
Thank you all for sharing that too. Everybody have a good day, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Tanya and Lauren
Thank you.
and Kelly and Rebecca.
Yes, thank you.